the two big problems are inflation and growth. And just a couple of months ago, all the worries seem centered around inflation. But in the last few weeks, it almost seems to have changed completely to a focus on growth and recession. Of the two devils which we are battling globally and locally, which worries you more, inflation or growth?
I think, as you correctly put it, Udayan, in the last 2 to 4 weeks, the focus has shifted to growth concerns rather than inflation concerns. And the reason is commodity prices, particularly that of crude oil, commodity prices have declined meaningfully in the last several weeks. Whether it is the price of crude oil, industrial metals, some food items, and the cost of shipping, the Baltic Dry Index, and even semiconductor prices, they all have begun to come down. And the feeling is therefore central bank tightening would slowly bring inflation back under control. That feeling has now started to emerge. Even Mohammed El-Arian, a well-known economist and a bond market strategist before, he has now said maybe the inflation rate has peaked. And even in India, because of all these global developments and due to the monsoon becoming very active, the concern now will also shift towards growth because inflation may have peaked at 7%. So globally, I think it is right that in the last 4 weeks, the concern has shifted towards growth. Suppose oil prices had remained very high in the 120s and 130s, then the concern would be on both. Even now, of course, it is quite possible as we head into the winter months in Europe and North America, inflation concerns may resurface if energy commodities go up in price. But right now, I think the feeling is that inflation may be getting tamed precisely because financial markets and commodities markets have begun to price in the impact of the higher interest rates on economic growth. And that is one of the reasons why commodity prices have corrected meaningfully. So between the two, as we speak, the concern indeed has shifted towards growth decline rather than inflation remaining persistently at very high single digits or in double digits in Europe and North America.
So let me ask you, Anand, is that reason to be happy or unhappy? I mean, while one can heave a sigh of relief that inflation is showing signs of peaking, as you just said, should we be happy? Will we be happy that growth concerns are coming to the center? Because the prospect of recession in US and Europe cannot be great news for the rest of the world, can it?
No, I mean, obviously it is difficult to say that one should be happy that the focus is shifting towards growth slowdown, because it may well be inevitable and it may be too late to reverse them. And in the process of reversing, if central banks prematurely shift towards an accommodative stance or abruptly end their monetary tightening, once again inflation concerns may resurface. So it is not easy to say whether this is a happy situation or a happier situation compared to what we faced. But from the Indian standpoint, I think the decline in commodities prices caused by concerns about growth in the developed world is a blessing in disguise. To some extent, concerns of economic slowdown in the developed world will necessarily have an impact on export prospects of developing countries, including that of India. But given that our concerns were more with inflation, because we are going to have a much better growth rate than many other developed and developing countries, and we were more concerned about ensuring that inflation didn't get out of hand. The financial markets concerns with economic growth in the developed world having resulted in lower commodities prices is a welcome development from the Indian standpoint. Therefore, I would argue that in the last 4 weeks, if anything, the global macroeconomic conditions, including that of commodities prices and interest rates in the United States, especially the bond market interest rates, etc., have moved to the favor of India.
Now that point I take, absolutely, no question about that, no argument on that, Anand. So my question is this: if the West were to slow down significantly, and as you would have noted that there has been a couple of instances of bond yield inversion in the US, which is often a reliable indicator that the recession is coming. If we do have recession in the US and Europe, or near recession conditions, how much of an impact do you see on Indian economic growth in the next 6-7 quarters?
Oh, that is a sort of a consolidated or a joint effect or a net effect of two competing forces. One is the impact coming on Indian exports because of recession, or as you put it, near recessionary conditions there. The other is that if the central banks in the developed world react to the onset of economic recession by halting or slowing their rate increases, or in some cases even reversing them, then what happens is that liquidity conditions in reserve currencies become easier, capital flows into emerging markets and to countries like India will resume, and the tightness in dollar supply will ease globally, and therefore on balance, without doing any explicit or formal modeling, I would argue that on balance it would be beneficial to India rather than hurtful.